Although my therapist may say I'm depressed and I have anxiety and I have a lot of trauma, my life could be a lot worse. I could be a junior in high school wearing a size 13 Nikes, a men's size 13 Nikes. This new interpretation on the significance of my trauma is a result of media gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation executed by one person's attempt to erode reality for another. Victims of abuse are facing a verbal and clandestine humanitarian crisis. Gaslighters master the art of not only stripping the voice of joy from their victims, but also stripping the voice of trauma. We are all healing from something we do not wish to verbalize, and it is imperative to not compare trauma when you do not know someone's story. In a society that benefits and profits off of your self-doubt, not only is self-love revolutionary, but encouraging others is a rebellious act. Our minds are powerful things, and with great power comes the ability to construct great silence. When someone wants to control us and that power is used for nefarious purposes of manipulation, it comes in forms of passive aggression, but most importantly, gaslighting. With gaslighting, an abuser executes several various actions and behaviors that manipulate the victim in questioning everything they feel, think, and believe, essentially eroding their sanity until they're at the gaslighter's mercy. Do you feel like that you're a complete outcast and that you just don't belong anywhere? This feeling is artificially encouraged by the abuser because normal is being defined by them to keep you under their control. The goal of the abuser is to shred this definition of your experiences through persistent lies. You're remembering that wrong. It's not as bad as you think. It really isn't that deep. Kourtney Kardashian, I'm a great guy. You keep overreacting. Oh, Scott, she's not. The more minuscule your voice is perceived to be by the oppressor feeds into their sovereignty. Persistence is so contradictory that your experiences are now being questioned. Textbook gaslighter faces are, I never said that, stop imagining things, this is fake news. Sound familiar? According to mental health professionals, gaslighters are most commonly narcissistic. Again, sound familiar. In our time together, we are going to uncover the anguished realities of teenage suicide and isolation and racial oppressions, and uncover how these internal afflictions all start with simple microaggressions that we practice unconsciously every day. Now you see, gaslighting does not always have to be as extreme as the Twitter feed between Cardi B and Nicki Minaj. We can gaslight ourselves every day in simple, small-scale conversations. Hey, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Did you actually listen to their question? We have these internal barriers that obstruct our ability to listen, and out of defense, we treat this simple question like a grace note in music, and deflect this eccentric question onto the other person because we haven't even asked ourselves how we're doing. This simple conversational phrase triggers our fight or flight quicker than almost any other question out there. And for most of us, we choose flight. Dylan Grante, a crisis line counselor from the National Suicide Network, tells a story in a TED Talk that one day he was on the phone with a kid named Mark. Now, when he was gathering information on Mark, he asked Mark, "What gender do you identify as?" Mr. Grante was in the middle of writing male when Mark panically responded, "Transgender, preferably non-binary." Mr. Grante's intentions were in no means cynical, and yet he proved that your best intentions to empathetically understand someone does not actually mean that you're listening to them. According to the American Foundation for National Suicide Prevention, found that more teenagers and adults are dying from suicide than cancer or heart disease. In a study conducted by the Jason Foundation in 2018, in our nation, there is an average of almost 3,703 suicide attempts made daily by young people who have been peer pressured from grades 9 to 12. How many of you have heard, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me"? Now, how many of you believe that is one of the greatest fallacies you've ever heard? Words destroy, and through the power of gaslighting, words have the ability to misconstruct someone's entire reality. You see, the power balance teenagers feel when they gaslight to achieve social hierarchy reminds me of a drug. They feed and they feed and they feed and they feed off of the shredded realities of their peers and wonder why they still feel hungry. You see, I can firmly say that you can't hurt my feelings. I was a dancer for 11 years. It's easy to watch Dance Moms on screen and see it as some lighthearted TV show. But for me, it hits much closer to home. From classical ballet to the competitive dance world, I've heard it all. And through my experiences, I picked up on how daily microaggressions truly become an avalanche. It starts with small comments like, "You should get a new leotard, yours looks a bit smug," to the gradual incline of girls sending you diet plans when you were already underweight. And soon skipping a meal became not being able to look at my thighs or arms in the mirror without sobbing, wondering why I couldn't enjoy the crumbs on my plate. As a former size 0, the ballet competition world muse, patching the fat on my inner thighs, drawing lines on my arms of the fat I wish would just disappear, and rubbing my fingers around my wrist to make sure they can touch became second nature, and body dysmorphia became my new reality. A teenage girl I once knew, we'll call Julia, once decided to go all the way with her boyfriend. She did this in a loving and trusting manner with the intentions of this being an act of true love. A week later, she was dumped and her video was at the access of everyone's fingertips. And her boyfriend made her new reality a dirty slut, without even taking a look at his own hands. Alicea, the author of The Sociology of Youth Suicide, states, once the victim's sense of reality has completely been eroded and they can no longer trust their own thoughts and senses of reality, is suicide even a choice? Tough lesson that Julia and I and other victims of verbal abuse have to learn is to take note of your vulnerabilities, which is a common theme that you will also see in victims of narcissism. Narcissism has a great parallel with another ism, and that is racism. Dr. Amani, a licensed clinical psychologist, lists the characteristics of narcissistic people, and through research has found that they lack empathy, lack self-awareness, are entitled, are arrogant, often sometimes have a superiority complex, and have a deep sense of insecurity. Sounds like a racist, right? But to further expand on the foundation of racism, you must introduce the key ingredient, prejudice. Reporter Tanzega Vega from the New York Times documented an event in the Lowell Lecture Hall in Cambridge where the I Too Am Harvard one-night performance where the Black Student Union at Harvard University constructed a play to display their microaggressional experiences. Performers held up signs stating various microaggressions that they face on a daily, that are phrased as the most commonly lack malice and are yet possessed by prejudice. Some of the signs included, "Will you teach me how to twerk? My name is Monica, not my..." As a young female of color, I faced many microaggressions on a day-to-day basis. Where other little girls in my classroom growing up would give each other Disney princesses to play with, I was always given Dora. Despite Dora being an absolutely unproblematic and Spanish-speaking queen, I always felt out of place when people asked me, "Am I Mexican?" which is something I'm asked a lot. I tell them I'm Puerto Rican and they never fail to tell me same thing. Racial minorities live in a world where gaslighting is normal. After a person may experience a microaggression, only in rare cases do we speak out on our own discomfort, simply because this is normalized. Hearing things like, "That was in the past, it's not like that anymore, it was way worse back then," are gaslighting phrases that I have become immune to. Some things I've heard normalized in American schools have been nicknames. From my personal experience, it's always been Dora. And sometimes I wish they could at least pick something more creative, but more recently it's become illegal, or I wish the wall would be built faster. Once I was friends with a boy who we'll call Paul, and one time we were arguing, and when he realized his argument was not valid, he told me to go clean the neighbor's house. The worst part about it all was not been the words of prejudice spewed out against me, but the fact that this is not an extraordinary occurrence. Why should the number of mental health abuse victims continue to rise when we can correct ourselves or our peers or our loved ones in the time of our lives when these phrases become habits? Being more cognizant of our own prejudices is the first step to results, and you must remove the seed before the roots are grounded, and not only taking into account our own actions, but also enforcing accountability to those we love and know, and taking accountability over our own insecurities and how we deflect them onto other people. When it comes to this humanitarian crisis, neutrality is the side of the oppressor.